Because you know I'm all about that bass, no trouble. I'm all about that bass, no trouble. I'm all about that bass, no.
Hello everyone, and this is going to be our review notes for our first test, which is going to be on First People, the American Indians, and exploration. It's everything we've studied the first month of school. So let's get started. And the first essential question that we focused on was, how did the first Americans adapt to their environment? And that's something that we talked about in every region that we looked at. So we talked about the first people, and they were nomads, which just means traveling around in search of food. And many of the first people came from Asia, and as you can see on the map, they traveled down from Asia into North America and all the way down into South America. They crossed over a land bridge that we call Beringia, that today is covered by water. And eventually these first people learned how to farm. This allowed them to settle in one place instead of chasing animals. Because the first people were nomadic, they were constantly wandering around looking for their food. Today, we call these nomads the American Indians or even Native Americans. They call themselves the people. We look briefly at early civilizations as it was a big focus in 7th grade. And we talked about the Mayas, who were in Mexico, Belize, and Guatemala. And they made discoveries in astronomy. They had a calendar. The Aztecs, who were in Mexico and were excellent builders. And then the Incas, who were around the Andes Mountains, and they built great roads. So these are 3 different civilizations that it was a huge focus, but these first people eventually turned into civilizations. This year, our big focus was on the Native Americans of the United States, and we looked at the Eastern Woodlands, the Northwest Indians, the Plains Indians, and the Southwest. So these are going to be 4 tribes that you'll need to know. And historians have used artifacts to group natives into cultural regions. That's the different colors of this map. And that's just putting them together based on language and way of life, similar customs and beliefs. So we have the Eastern Woodlands, and there were 2 major groups, the Iroquois and the Algonquin. And they used slash and burn agriculture. This means that they would burn all of the trees so that they could farm. They lived in longhouses, they would fit 30 to 80 people in one of these longhouses here, and they were made out of trees and leaves, and that's really how they used the environment around them. The Algonquins lived in wigwams, which is very similar, but it's a round house made out of trees and leaves for one family, and they grew what they called the 3 sisters, and that's corn, beans, squash, and pumpkins. They put squash and pumpkins into the same category, but that's the most important crops of the Eastern Woodlands. The deer was very important as it was used for many things. Skin for clothing, antlers for tools, and even meat for food. The Northwest Indians were located on the opposite end of the United States along the Pacific Ocean. And they lived in cedar plank houses because they had cedar trees. They used totem poles that were made out of this cedar and told the history of the clan through the power animal. They had abundance of food from the sea, and that's what they used harpoons for. And then we talked about the Plains Indians, which are located in the central part of the United States, and they lived in teepees. And really everything revolved around the buffalo. They used it for clothing, for the teepees, for tools from the bones. They even used buffalo dung for fuel. That's how they would have fires. We also looked at the Southwest Indians, or the Mesa Indians, and they lived in pueblos, which they would make from mud or adobe. You can fit up to 1,000 people in one of these apartment-like buildings. So the real thinking slide is, why would their culture be different depending on their environment? If you were to look at each of these groups, you can notice that they all had different cultures because they used everything that they had around them, climate, and their resources. So there were 6 causes of European exploration, 6 things that caused Europeans to come to the New World, because if they didn't come, Native Americans would still be here today as the only people in America. But Europeans came, and Marco Polo's book is really the first thing, when he talks about his travels, that made Europeans curious to get to Asia. The second was the Renaissance, and it's a word that means rebirth, and it was the revival of learning. And so that really inspired people that wanted to learn and wanted to go to new places. The third one is new trade routes to the Indies. The old route was by land and sea, and it was very difficult. So they wanted to find a new way that they could get to the Indies. And also, the Muslims had the land route blocked, and so to get through Turkey. So they had to find new ways to try and get to the Indies, and that and Italy also controlled that trade. So the fourth reason they wanted to get to the Indies was of the precious goods. They had jewels, perfumes, and silk. And without refrigeration, Asian spices kept goods preserved and tasty. Europe had items to trade such as wool, cloth, and tin. And then Prince Henry, who we talked about briefly, he started a school for navigation in Portugal, and this really, helped to design faster sailing ships, helped to improve the compass, helped, to really improve navigation in general. And then, of course, we get into Christopher Columbus. He landed on San Salvador and opened up America to the rest of the world. And that's really what inspired other people to come to America. Finding gold made other people interested. And he set up a trade between the Old World and the New World called the Columbian Exchange. And it's a very important part of our test that's coming up. So you want to make sure that you take a look at the Columbian Exchange in your packet, maybe revisit it in the book. So because of Christopher Columbus, other explorers start to really search America. And these explorers, they went for the 3 G's. And I know you learned about it last year, but the 3 G's are gold, they wanted to get rich; glory, they wanted to expand their empire and also become famous; and they also wanted to spread Christianity. That's the God. And we're going to focus on the Spanish explorers first. Because he discovered a new open continent, Spain started to send conquistadors or conquerors, such as Hernando Cortez. Hernando Cortez, he conquered the Aztecs. They had a lot of gold. That's the main reason. And then Francisco Pizarro, he defeated the Incas. These are 2 people that we did learn about last year. Quick thinking slide. How could a small group defeat such a large empire? And there's a whole bunch of reasons. Think about it, 100 people defeating, this massive 1,000 empire. Well, guns and cannons are one reason. Horses, armor, and of course diseases. That's really a big one, is the diseases that came over with the Europeans, such as smallpox, chickenpox, and measles. Now, in our next unit, we looked at the essential question: how did Europeans explore and establish colonies in America? So we have New Spain, and we know that New Spain, they claimed Florida, Middle America, South America, the Caribbean, and even the southwest part of the United States. They built walled forts called presidios, and missions to convert Indians to Christianity. And we did a whole lesson where you had to draw the difference between a presidio and a mission, and we even looked at images, and you decided, oh, this is a fort, it's a presidio, this is a mission where they wanted to convert Indians. Now, they did teach Native Americans how to use new tools, but they also gave Puebla Indians diseases and whipped them if they didn't convert. So they actually had a very negative relationship with the Indians. And we know France, and if you look here, you can see France is in blue. They claimed Canada and everything west of the Mississippi, and England is in red, and that's what we're going to be studying in our next unit. Portugal, which we don't study too much. Spain, which we study a lot, and they're in green. And then the Dutch, which is that little bit of purple all the way up here in New York. So France, England, and the Dutch were more interested in finding the Northwest Passage, which is a shorter route to Asia, than they were in finding North America. And this Northwest Passage, what exactly was it? So you should know it's a river that would go through the entire continent of the United States. It does not exist. We have the Continental Divide at the Rocky Mountains. All rivers that are on the east flow to the east or south, and all rivers on the west flow to the west. New France was the next unit we studied, and we talked about Jacques Cartier and how he claimed present-day Canada for France, and he named it New France. And then we talked about Samuel Champlain, who is the father of New France, and he actually founded Quebec as the first trading post and settlement. He's the one who started the French fur trade. And then finally we talked about La Salle, who explored down the Mississippi and claimed the lands to the west for France. He's the one who also named that land Louisiana in honor of King Louis. Now, New France, very few farmers because of the cold weather and because people had to rent farmland. We talked about the Côte de Bois, and these are the French fur traders. They lived in France. We did an acted out where some of you dressed up as Côte de Bois, and they traded with the Huron Indians, and that's, you need to be able to distinguish. They were actually business partners with the Huron. Now, New Netherland was what we just studied in the last couple days. Henry Hudson, he claimed the land for the Dutch, present-day New York, and Peter Minuet, who purchased Manhattan for $24. And we also talked about Peter Stuyvesant, who was the harsh governor, Peg-Leg Pete. And what made this colony so unique was it was very diverse. And if you think about New York today, it's still the same today. They have many peoples. It is a huge melting pot of cultures in New York. They traded furs with the Iroquois Indians, and they were business partners with the Iroquois because remember, the French and the Huron had this relationship, and they were business partners, and they were attacking the Iroquois. So the Iroquois needed to get a business partner. And it happened to be that the Netherlands were looking for furs as well. And so they started that same type of relationship. Do you think the New Netherlands or the Dutch and the French were friends? I sure hope you don't. And we talked about the lasting influences such as bowling and golf and coleslaw and different places in New York such as Brooklyn and Harlem and Coney Island. All these places that have Dutch names. And then we even have presidents like FDR and George H.W. Bush and George W. Bush. And lastly, you need to know this map. You need to know who settled where you need to know that France, New France, was in the center part of the United States and Canada. You need to know that the Dutch are this little pink area here, and you need to know that Spain is all the way down here. And there will be a map on your test, so make sure that you know this. I've even provided you with some blank practice sheets in your slides. All right, so make sure you copy all this down and listen to the study cast and also fill in your study guide. So all of this is going to help you do.
I'm all about that bass,